Well, hello, everybody. If you don't know me already, I'm Steve Lindo. I'm one of the co-editors of PRMIA's Intelligent Risk. And amongst my many pleasures as the co-editor is to be able to meet, talk to, and get to know some of our authors. And so in today's conversation, I'm going to be speaking with, and you're going to be hearing from Katie Price. Now, Katie is the author of the capstone article that's going to be published in our soon-to-be February issue of Intelligent Risk. And she was, up until recently, she was the governor of the Wandsworth prison in the UK's prison service. And during that period, in 2023, she was responsible for the safety and security of the prisoners and was caught in the middle of a very high-profile prisoner escape. And the upshot of that experience is what she's going to share with us in our little conversation today. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining us. Let me ask you then a first question, which is, after the experience that you went through with its many dimensions, what prompted you then to record and to explain that experience in your article?
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. So what prompted me? It was really prompted by the direct experience, both personally and organisationally, of being the governor of HMP Wandsworth during the high-profile escape of Daniel Khalif, who is now a convicted terrorist. So from a prisoned perspective, it was very high-profile, very media-worthy. On a personal level, it was one of the biggest failures that could have occurred personally. And obviously I took that away and wanted to analyse that in more detail. And what I found was that the incident wasn't just a local failure. It was a local failure at some levels, but it was also a symptom of more deep-seated systemic failures across the UK prison service. And I don't think those issues are necessarily unique to the custodial sector, and I think there is a wider risk management issue across multiple organisations. For me, the escape exposed vulnerabilities in risk management, crisis response, or organisational resilience. And particularly in those environments that are overburdened systems, resource constraints, it was an ideal landscape for something critical to happen. And the article for me is almost a root cause analysis that I wanted to go through personally so that I could evaluate it on a much more personal level of the Wandsworth escape and the reflection on the broader risk management failures that could occur in any high-risk complex organisation where there are systemic vulnerabilities and they're tolerated, unfortunately, until a crisis forces a response. And certainly from my perspective, that's what happened at Wandsworth. It was foreseeable. The warning signs were there, but unfortunately, organisationally, we didn't manage that risk and mitigate that risk far enough.
Thank you. Well, what you're saying, I'm sure, echoes pretty strongly with many of the readers of our publication, because situations that are fragile, but that are supposed to be robust, this is kind of the daily issues that risk managers face across many different industries, whether it's financial services, whether it's manufacturing, other kinds of services. Could you maybe just give a couple of examples of some of what you might call the structural weaknesses that were unique to the prison service in general and to your situation at Wandsworth Prison?
Yeah, so there was a pattern of warning signs that really went unheeded, both locally and in the wider organisation. So there were a number of security failures in the prison with equipment that wasn't working, so CCTV that was failing. The processes and risk assessment processes were not being followed and were not being mitigated or assessed to identify those vulnerabilities. There were limited staffing numbers and very inexperienced staff, all of which almost culminated to create the perfect storm, which Daniel Khalif utilised to ensure that he could escape. He identified those vulnerabilities over a period of time and recognised where those failures were likely to occur. And unfortunately, he on this particular day, he managed to exploit all of those in order to effect a very clear escape. I think obviously there were IT issues, there were CCTV blind spots, risk assessments and risk mitigations were not prioritised. We'd become accustomed to working in particular ways. And although a number of those have been highlighted in the higher up organisation, the funding, the ability to be able to change that wasn't available. And as a kind of final issue was the overcrowding, because that meant less staff to more prisoner ratio, and the supervision was less than effective.
Got it. Well, that combination that you described is a perfect storm where you have technology weaknesses, you have control, let's say inefficiencies, you have some cultural issues with the employees, including, as you say, maybe some training deficits. These are recurring themes with not only some of the articles that have been published in Intelligent Risk in previous issues, but also I think in the daily work of many of our readers and their various different industries. So they're no doubt at this point basically breathing a sigh of relief that they haven't had to be in a position of being a prison governor with all of the constraints that you had to face. But I'm sure they're interested to know, given that you went through this horrendous experience and you kind of emerged from it not unscathed, but maybe wiser, few gray hairs and so on. I'm sure they're interested to hear what you could advise them when they happen to be in some similar situation, not obviously in the prison service, but maybe, let's say, in financial services where budgets have kept the risk resources and controls, and let's say the technology is out of date, but for reasons of cost has not yet been updated. In your mind, what kind of let's say strategies and processes do you think our readers could look to try to avoid having something as devastating in their world as you encountered in yours?
I think the big takeaways for other risk leaders for me is proactive risk mitigation. So over that crisis response, we're wonderful in prisons over crisis, but actually what we needed to do was front end that proactive risk management. The danger of normalizing deviation from processes and policies, it had become the norm because you had inexperienced staff teaching the next grade of inexperienced staff. So those processes were not embedded in the particular way they should have been. So that complacency and that procedural shift. The need for real-time dynamic risk assessments, so those identifying where the risks are on that daily basis. Under Daniel Khalifa's situation, we knew he was on remand for particular types of charges. We could have put more risk management around him. Bridging the gap between the local and organisational leadership. So there was a distinct lack of alignment between the local leadership and the organisational leadership. And whilst the warnings that had been identified and escalated up to the organisation, those had been done, they weren't effectively dealt with or understood. And then finally, kind of managing the short-term crisis response with the long-term risk strategies. So making sure that you've got short-term risk management and risk crisis responses, but actually you have a longer-term strategy to manage the risk in the wider context.
Great. Well, that is very helpful. Well, I'm assuming that quite a number of our readers and listeners to this conversation have some obligations with regard to resilience. Resilience has become a very dynamic topic. There's been surveys, there's been articles. People are becoming aware that resilience, you can procrastinate until it happens, and then you wish you hadn't. So in the greater emphasis on resources and practice and so on, and resilience, even in the more, let's say, mundane world of financial services or manufacturing industries, seems to be getting more attention. And I think, an article like yours, which clearly demonstrates the potential catastrophic results of not only the process issues and the organizational issues that you described, but also having the sufficient amount of, let's say, disaster prevention, crisis management, all the things you mentioned. Hopefully this will give our readers a little bit more encouragement to push for those things, because if they're not in place when catastrophic things happen, well, whilst you can blame external forces for the catastrophe, which in your case, obviously, this was, a very dangerous criminal, you have to look in the mirror, you have to look at yourself and wonder, were you sufficiently prepared? And I think your article very honestly, I think, and courageously tells our readers that you weren't prepared, but you learned from that, and you decided to share those learnings with our readers. So, Katie, on behalf of PRMIA's Intelligent Risk, this is just, a brief trailer, so to speak, for the article, which our readers will get to see when our February issue is published in a couple of weeks. I'd like to say thank you so much for not only contributing your article, but also taking the time to speak to our readers and share some of your thoughts. So many thanks, and we will be seeing your writings in the February issue.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.